Welcome to the Power to Flourish podcast, where science meets the art of a beautiful life. I'm Dr. Andrea Line, positive psychologist, giftedness expert and coach, and modern-day spiritual godmother to brilliant, deep-feeling women. This isn't just another self-help podcast. It's a sanctuary, a sacred space to come back to yourself. Each week, we'll explore the emotional experience of gifted, sensitive women and what it means to live a life that feels as beautiful as it may look. Because flourishing isn't a luxury, it's your birthright, and your life is waiting. This is the Power to Flourish podcast. Welcome back, my love. Well, last week, if you haven't listened, I shared very personally in real time about something I have been experiencing in this month of February, the month of love. So I don't know if it's a coincidence. I like to think maybe it's not, but I shared all about this extremely beautiful spiritual experience I've been having. And I promised that in this episode, I would unpack this a little bit more from a scientific perspective. Of course, I'm not trying to take something that is extremely spiritual and remove the beauty and the mystery of it all. But I think that there are some things that I want to share with you, just I guess from a psychological perspective, and clarify some things and talk about secure attachment and my own thoughts around that and our relationship with God and all the things. So that's what today's episode is going to be about. And if you haven't listened to last week's episode, one, you may want to because this episode builds upon that one. But even if you don't, just trust me when I say, I have been walking through what feels like a reorganization on the inside of me that I wasn't trying to construct. And I said this last week, I have felt for a while that I have been living in a pretty secure, loving place already. I felt loved. If you asked me last year, do you feel loved? I would say, yes, I felt secure, but this feels like a step beyond that. So I guess I would say it feels like security with surplus. It's like security with more delight, more outrageousness, just more. That expansiveness feeling, which many of you probably can relate to because we have these I like to call sort of like a quantum leap experience, like a qualitative shift in how we experience the world. And I think that's what I've been going through, just another level of that. So first, I want to talk about self-love, this concept of self-love, and what I think we often mean in self-love in the psychological world. But when we talk about self-love today, especially online, it can mean a lot of different things. So you're listening to this, you probably have your own ideas of what self-love means. Maybe you think self-care. That's the first thing that comes to mind. Sometimes we think of it in terms of confidence. Sometimes maybe we think of it more in terms of setting boundaries. But in psychological science, when we talk about healthy self-love, we're usually talking about something a little more specific, which is self-compassion. And self-compassion has been studied extensively by the researcher Kristin Neff, which I think many of you have heard of at this point. I remember over a decade ago, her work was really finally coming on the scene. And Kristin Neff defines self-compassion as having three core components. And the first is self-kindness. So responding to yourself with warmth instead of harsh self-criticism when you struggle or fail. A lot of us struggle with that. I know I definitely did. And I'm so happy to say that today, I would say 99% of the time, I am really so kind to myself. But I was not there earlier in my life. The second component is common humanity, recognizing that suffering and imperfection are part of being human. So your suffering isn't unique in the sense of there's something wrong with you. You're not uniquely messed up or something. You're simply just human. And that sense of not being alone so much can be really, really helpful when it comes to self-compassion. And the third is mindful awareness. And that's the ability to notice your pain or distress without suppressing it or exaggerating it. Because we can go on either one of those ditches. Sometimes we feel like we just can't feel it or we don't want to show it. And then other times we feel like we've got to really make it known, right? So self-compassion, I would say from this framework, it is not self-indulgent. It's not this over-focused, like a navel-gazing way of looking at yourself, which sometimes I think in some circles, self-love feels like a bad word because it has this connotation maybe of being self-centered or self-focused, but that is not at all how I'm talking about it psychologically. And it's also not pretending everything is fine. So it's not the rose-colored glasses. It's not sort of swimming in self-pity or something, but it's just very balanced. It's kind. It's a grounded way of relating to yourself, especially when things are hard. But it's just a way of relating to yourself all the time. And the research on this is strong. Self-compassion is associated with lower levels of anxiety and depression, greater emotional resilience, reduced shame, and healthier coping. So in other words, self-compassion helps us regulate ourselves. And that's really, really important. Self-compassion is like an internal regulation strategy. Strategy is kind of a funny word to use for it, I guess, but it's a way of being with yourself. It's a way of steadying your own nervous system through kindness instead of criticism. But here is the nuance that I want you to take away and what I was trying to get at last week. Self-compassion, or if we want to say self-love, is important and powerful, but it is still self-regulation. So even at its healthiest form, and it is, like I said, I believe it's very important. Self-compassion is still self-regulation. It's you helping you. And while that is powerful and necessary, human beings are not wired to regulate alone. And that is where attachment theory comes in. So many of you are probably familiar with attachment theory on some level. Again, nowadays, everything is out there on social media. So I imagine many of you, if you're listening to me, you've probably read or heard something about secure attachment or attachment theory in general. So just a brief history lesson. Attachment theory began with John Bowlby in the mid-20th century, and it was later expanded through the research of Mary Ainsworth and many, many others. And of course, today we've got so much more research around this. It's very fun. And I have always used an attachment theory frame in my work with clients. And at its core, attachment theory just proposes something very simple, but very profound, which is human beings are biologically wired for connection, deep connection. Infants do not regulate their nervous systems independently. I think that's like obvious, but again, I'm just going to state it very clearly. And as a grandmother to a new baby girl, I've had the privilege to watch my daughter mother her well, to watch her father take her in his arms, and it just soothed her. You know, for me to have that experience of helping little Faye regulate herself when she's distressed. And when a baby is distressed and a caregiver responds consistently and sensitively, you know, just like the basic things, picking them up, soothing them, feeding them, making eye contact, that's huge. The baby's nervous system settles. And over time, and this is a very important window of time in these first few years of life, the brain wires a template, which is in secure attachment. When I am distressed, someone comes. When I reach, someone responds. And just this basic foundational piece of I am safe in relationship, and it's consistent. I feel consistently safe. It's so huge. And that internal working model becomes the foundation for how we experience connection throughout life. Now, that doesn't mean things can't happen later in life either to negatively affect or positively shift our attachment style. But right now, I'm just doing sort of a real brief overview of attachment if you're not familiar. So when we talk about secure attachment, we mean that a person has internalized this sense of relational safety. Secure attachment doesn't mean that life is easy. People who have a secure attachment still have life the way you and I do. It doesn't mean that conflict never happens. It doesn't mean that bad things don't happen, right? However, it means that love feels stable. The bond doesn't feel fragile. When rupture happens in relationship, repair is possible. And there is a felt sense that support is available. So secure attachment answers the question really, am I safe in connection? Am I safe? Am I supported? Can I rely on this? And from a nervous system perspective, secure attachment reduces hypervigilance, meaning the body, is not constantly scanning for abandonment or threat of some sort. There's less of this like bracing energy, like defensive energy, and there's just more capacity for exploration and creativity. So one of the things I noted, I was sharing with my daughter when I was last visiting, I was watching my grandbaby crawl around and she's moving, she's moving now, and she's already standing and even walking, even at a young age. She's not even one yet, but I was watching her play. And I pointed it out to my daughter because my daughter had gone into the kitchen, which was right next door to sort of this playroom. And I was watching little baby Faye. And it was so fun to watch, the psychologist and me, watching her was how I could see how securely attached she is based on the way she was playing, based on the way she could check in with mom, based on the way she could go out and explore, based on how she responded to mom when mom came back in the room, like all of these things that we know about secure attachment. And I think that made my daughter feel, every mom wants to hear that good news, but it really is a beautiful thing. Secure attachment allows the nervous system to downregulate fear. It doesn't mean we never experience fear, because of course, sadly, my grandbaby is going to experience things in life that make her feel afraid. That is going to happen. That's already happened. But when when my grandbaby knows that she's not alone, when we trust that love and safety remains like underneath, it's like we don't even need to think about it. We're a fish in the water. The fish isn't thinking about the water. The water is just there. It's assumed. It's implied. And when it's that secure space, then your body can soften. That's the physiological foundation of what we call emotional security in attachment language. So that was a mini lesson. I could go on and on, but that was just a little mini lesson. And I was reflecting on sort of like I track my own experience in my healing journey, because my childhood, my adolescence, even my young adulthood, I had just so much time and experiences in my early life that were quite challenging and left me feeling very afraid, very uncertain, very hypervigilant, very much not in secure attachment energy at all. So that was earlier in my life, but I've done a lot of healing. I've had a lot of growth. And something that was really interesting for me last year, almost all of 2025, was noticing how I handled something that I think would cause maybe, I don't know if it's most people, but probably many people, if not most, opportunity for fear, panic, anxiety, etc. So my husband, at the end of 2024, his job was cut. like many people have experienced, especially in the corporate world, which is where he works. It wasn't really surprising in some sense because so many cuts were happening. But of course, when it happens to you, it's never fun. And he had been at that job for 20 years. So for him, that experience and transitioning and moving into something new, that whole thing took a lot of psychological energy. And, it's a whole process. I don't mean to diminish the challenge of that. However, I noticed for me, and I noticed it because it was very different than probably I would have responded earlier in my life. But my nervous system never went into panic. And when I say never, I've tried to explain it to people like I wasn't trying to not be anxious. Sometimes we kind of feel anxious, but then we're telling ourselves we're repeating certain things, or we're kind of working at trying not to be anxious. I never had to work at it. I just genuinely trusted, and my nervous system was so stable and not in a panic mode. I never spiraled, nothing. I mean, if anything, I was just like, well, this is an opportunity for something new. And I was excited for him, and I was excited for us. And I knew and I trusted that we were going to be okay. I knew we were going to be okay. There was not a doubt in my mind. And some might say, oh, that is denial, or, some kind of delusion or something, because how can you know? But I would say that was a symptom, if you want to call it that, of secure attachment. I was completely secure, and I knew I was held. I knew we were held. I knew we were going to be okay. So secure attachment regulates fear. But what I have been experiencing lately, and what I shared on last week's podcast, feels like a move. It's still grounded in that secure attachment, but it has felt like it's even more expansive. And I've been trying to think of, like, again, in psychological terms, how can I talk about this? Because I don't even know if we have, I don't feel like we have great language or concepts in psychology to talk about this. Now, I don't know everything there is about psychology, so I could be missing something, but I'm just trying to find words for myself. And, one thought I have is security and secure attachment specifically quiets fear. That feeling of love that I talked about last week, it certainly quiets fear. And I felt loved before February 2026. So I know that I have been sitting in that place for a while. But what I've been trying to articulate, and what, again, I'm sure this will unfold more as time goes on, but this realization, or experiential, I would say, this experiential change, shift, whatever we might call it, this beloved abundance that I feel doesn't just quiet fear. It doesn't just say, okay, you'll survive, you'll be fine, your needs are taken care of. It's like the step beyond, which is you are so delighted in that you move from like safety to expectancy. And again, like I just said last year, I expected good things. So it's not like I haven't expected good things in the past. And secure attachment definitely plays that role in that. But as you can tell, I'm having a hard time putting words to it. I'm having a hard time putting words to it. I will try my best. I want to talk just a little bit because what I've just shared about secure attachment, how I felt last year and even now, just really briefly about what it feels like in your body, because attachment is not just emotional and relational. While it is all those things, it's physiological. And you know this in your body. You know what it feels like when we're not regulated, when our nervous system isn't regulated. And when we feel securely attached, when love feels stable, available, the nervous system shifts. From the biological perspective, all humans, all of our nervous systems, we're wired to constantly scan for any cue of safety or threat, right? It's survival. If we didn't, that would be problematic. This happens largely outside of our conscious awareness, although some of you, because you're gifted women and because you're very aware, you may be more aware of when you're scanning for any cue. And that hypervigilance is also if it's extreme, right? It's a sign that we're probably not securely attached, that we've had some kind of trauma that we haven't healed from. Hypervigilance is one of the key symptoms of PTSD, for example. And when attachment feels uncertain, when love feels like fragile or inconsistent, or maybe at risk, the body moves into vigilance. So these things, while you might not think of them necessarily as attachment, you might think of it more in terms of trauma or like PTSD. It doesn't have to be PTSD because there's relational trauma that happens. And that is definitely something I experienced in my life. But you could be living with like tightness in your chest, racing thoughts, people pleasing, over functioning, emotional reactivity, or on the other end, there could be withdrawal and total emotional shutdown. So these are just, I'm going through these really quickly to give you an idea. These are some things that can happen when we don't have that sense of secure attachment. That is the nervous system trying to protect the bond. So when attachment feels secure, when there is that deep internalized sense that connection remains, which for me, I should do a whole podcast episode on this because we're talking about attachment with humans, but this parallels and can be healed through attachment with God, this bigger, this relationship with something bigger than ourselves, which is, I had both in my healing journey. I would say my attachment wounds healed in my relationship with God, something bigger than myself, not a human, but also with humans because, we're living life here and we can help each other heal through relationship. And when we do heal, or when we just have a secure attachment from the get-go, which is so amazing and wonderful for those of you who have that, great. So great. I've had to live many years on this planet without that. So I have so much compassion for those who do not have that. But when you do have that, when you do feel secure, your cortisol lowers, your body just totally downregulates. Muscle tension decreases, breathing deepens, the brain shifts out of threat monitoring and into exploration. And that is what I saw in my little grandbaby. It's so fun to see, right? When someone is secure, they can go out and explore. You can go out into the world. You don't feel like, I got to stay in my little circle and I can never venture out because it's too scary out there. Secure attachment allows the nervous system to move out of that defensive posture. And this is really important. When the nervous system is not preoccupied with protecting connection, all those things, it has more energy available for creativity, generosity, and growth. And that's why you'll see securely attached individuals tend to explore more. They take healthy risks. They're not taking unhealthy risks because sometimes we see people who are major risk takers. And I kind of fell into this a little bit in my early teens. We see a lot of teens do this, but there's healthy risks. And then there's like almost, I would say, self-destructive risks, two different things. But people with secure attachment do take healthy risks. They show greater resilience and they're just able to maintain, a steadier emotional baseline. Security creates surplus capacity. And I think this is what many women miss. They might think it's just about relationships. And it is largely about relationships, but it's not just about relationships because attachment is about energy allocation. So if your system is constantly bracing for disconnection, you have less bandwidth for beauty, creativity, calling, or boldness. And when love feels secure, you don't have to brace. And when you don't have to brace, you can build. And that's why during the uncertainty of last year when my husband was without work, I wasn't spiraling. There was uncertainty, but not panic. My nervous system wasn't in like a collapse or alarm state around that. I trusted we were going to be okay. And I will add that I don't think and I had some really hard things happen last year, by the way, that were more challenging for me. Like my husband's lack of a job was not the challenge. And again, I think for a lot of people that might be, but for me, there were other things going on that when I was walking through it and coming up the other side, it was amazing how much energy was released, how much more energy I had to launch a podcast and, just do a lot of just the creative energy. It was so, so fascinating to watch myself walk through last year. And this is where I want to add a little nuance. Because when I shared last week about living as the beloved, I wasn't describing, for me, a move from insecurity into security necessarily. I already felt secure. I felt supported. I felt loved. I didn't feel like my nervous system was braced for something bad happening. I truly have felt secure. I felt stable. And what I have been experiencing lately, like I said earlier, feels like something beyond just the absence of fear. It's beyond sort of like that foundation of, secure attachment and nervous system regulation. It's beyond it. So if the secure attachment, if we look at it through that lens, whether you think of that secure attachment with God, secure attachment with people, secure attachment within yourself, however you want to think about it, it answers this question, am I safe? And what I have been experiencing answers a different question. Not am I safe, and not even am I loved? Am I seen? Am I known? Because I feel those things. It's, am I extravagantly loved? Like out of this world, beyond my imagination, where the place miracles live, where my brain cannot comprehend. Am I extravagantly loved? And there's a difference between knowing you'll survive, knowing your needs will be met even, knowing that you're stable and good, and the sense that goodness is pursuing you like you don't even know. It is searching you out. That beloved abundance. That's the only way I feel like I can talk about it. This beloved abundance. Like I can't find psychological language really to explain it because it's beyond, I feel like it's beyond, it is nervous system regulation in the sense of like deeper capacity. Like I feel this deeper capacity. Like there's a scripture that talks about enlarging your tent, like your tent pegs, like get pulled out larger. That is the feeling inside. It feels like more capacity for joy and delight and receiving. It feels so personal. It feels so specific, like being seen in details that are like startling. Like kind of almost it could be scary if you didn't trust that it was a good thing. It could freak you out. That's what I've been experiencing. Just more expansion, more awe, more gratitude, more softness, less guarded. I didn't feel guarded before, but I think I'm curious how I will move into the world. Like even more so, perhaps bolder. I feel ready, like I could take on a risk that maybe before could have given me some hesitation. And I don't know, again, I'll see what happens, but I feel like I could take it on. There's just more. There's just more. It's really, really amazing. And lastly, I wanted to share that there's this psychologist, I think he's still at Harvard, or he was, Robert Kegan, and he writes about how adults grow and develop over the adult lifespan. Really fascinating stuff if you have never heard of Robert Kegan. I wouldn't say it's light reading, but it's really fascinating. I used some of his framework when I was writing my dissertation. But it's not just how adults grow, like not just in terms of skills or anything like that, but like how we make meaning, how we experience the world. And he talks about these developmental shifts where something that once defined us becomes something we can step back and see. It's like this idea of subject and object. When something is subject, we are embedded in it. We can't see it clearly because it's organizing us. But when we grow, what was once subject becomes object. We can hold it. We can reflect on it. We can expand beyond it. And we have these like experiential shifts where we perceive things differently. And that, I think, is the closest, from a psychological framework, the closest thing I can get to describe what's been going on for me. But here's the most important part of that. Like, I don't need to get into all of his, levels of development or anything like that to talk about this. Here's the most important part you need to know. You cannot think your way into the next stage. It's not a thinking thing. It's not cognitive. You have to experience a reorganization. And growth at that level feels less like improvement and more like a widening. Like I said, it's like this opening, receiving. And I think what I've been experiencing is one of those widenings. I'll close with this. Some of you listening right now are secure, you're stable, you've done a lot of inner work already, and your nervous system isn't in chaos. And I also recognize many of you listening don't necessarily feel like you're in that place. But even for those who, perhaps like me, you felt like, I'm good, I'm pretty good, which is a great spot to be, I want to ask you this question. What would flourishing level security look like in your life? That's a different kind of question. It's a different envisioning. What would you change if you trusted not just that you'll survive, that your needs will be met, maybe even more than your basic needs being met, but that, and here's the key, this belief that goodness and love, extravagant love, is pursuing you. Security quiets fear, but beloved abundance, I think, awakens courage on another level we didn't even realize we were missing or not living from. I hope today's episode served you. If you haven't listened to last week's episode where I dive into all the personal details, I would encourage you to do that because I think it just gives a little more flavor. Some things that we talk about, we can try to understand the psychology and the science behind it. And sometimes that can be really helpful. But I think with experiential shifts, sometimes all that is needed is to stay open to the experience and let our minds be blown. I think part of why I'm having a hard time just explaining this is because really big things defy explanation. So with that, I hope this served you. I hope you got something from this. I hope this takes you into your own journey, your continual journey of expansion, feeling safe, feeling secure, feeling loved, feeling delighted in all of the things. I hope you have a beautiful week. And until next time, keep flourishing. Thank you for listening to the Power to Flourish podcast. I hope today's conversation left you feeling more seen, more supported, and more deeply connected to yourself. And if this episode resonated, would you take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a friend? It's one of the best ways to help this work reach the women who need it most. You'll find show notes, links, and resources from today's episode at powertoflourish.com. And now just a quick reminder, this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It's not therapy, medical advice, or a substitute for professional support. Listening doesn't make me your therapist or doctor, though if you're looking for a coach, you know where to find me. All right, beautiful one, that's it for now. Until next time, trust yourself, honor your gifts, and keep flourishing.